Um, it is November 8th, Election Day, and welcome to our webcast on Ask a Performance Expert. I'm Ellen Dornan. I'm the Statewide History Day Coordinator for the state of New Mexico. And if you have any questions during this webcast, please feel free to use the chat function on YouTube. I'm Ellen Dornan. I'm the Statewide History Day Coordinator. And you can also email me your questions. My email is historyday@nmhum.org. This is part of a long series of webcasts on different aspects of developing projects for History Day. So previous webcasts are recorded and they're available on our YouTube channel for the New Mexico Humanities Council. And additional resources are also available at our website at nmhum.org/historyday. And today, for Ask a Performance Expert, I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Susi Wolf, who is a longtime Chautauquan for the New Mexico Humanities Council. Susi has been a multifaceted entertainer for many years. She currently combines her love of storytelling with acting to write and perform one-woman shows. So all you individual performance projects, take heart. Sometimes Susi steps off the stage to facilitate workshops like today. She believes acting and storytelling are just another form of teaching because there's communication and lessons in all performing arts. Susi believes this work is sacred and says she'll never retire, for which we are so grateful, not as long as there are stories to tell. And welcome, Susi. And I do also want to say Susi is also a longtime judge for National History Day. So if you have done performances in the past, chances are, and made it to state, chances are you have been judged by Susi. And so Susi has great perspective to share with us from both sides of developing a historical performance and judging History Day performances. And so I encourage you again to use the chat function to ask any questions you have or email me with any questions. But Susi, we're gonna take it away. And we wanted to start today talking about one of Susi's characters who's so apropos for Election Day because she is a suffragette, a closet suffragette. So do you want to start by telling us a little bit about Grand Mary?
Yes, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm Susi Wolf. It is such an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Grand Mary was a character that I developed years ago, has evolved over time. Today is a woman of means. She is wealthy. She is a bit austere. She is a woman of opinions. And she lives in upstate New York. And daughter by herself, and she is what I call a closet suffragette. Because of her standing in the community, she didn't want to be one of the ones marching, but she uses her influence and her station in life and her societal contacts to further the suffragette causes. She holds suffragette meetings in her library. Everyone knows she's a suffragette, but no one really talks about it. And so for Grand Mary, I spend quite a bit of time doing suffragette history so that the young girls in the audience and even the grown women understand we owe them a debt of gratitude that few people recognize today. We have a suffragette parade. I had a suffragette sash made that's authentic of the purple, white, and green, votes for women. And so we march around, votes for women, shout what you will. Women are equal. Women can do anything. And then we slowly shift the focus from I can do things. I can do many things, because constantly be instilling, not only in the young girls who are participating, but even in the women, of the empowerment and the self-esteem and the, I have things to offer, I have things to contribute. You know, there's much ahead for me. So you can present very historically correct and very serious things in a fun way, so that people walk away saying, gosh, I just feel better afterwards. And I get that a lot when I leave. Thank you, Grand Mary. I just feel so happy. I feel good about myself. One woman told me, you know, I've been wanting to go back to school for years, and I never have. And because I marched in that parade with you, I made up my mind. I'm going back to school. I never know what's going to happen.
So I'm curious, just because we're talking about taking a stand in history this year, how has your presentation of Grand Mary's taking a stand evolved over time?
She began as a character, and where she is now, it has undergone several rebirthings. Grand Mary started for me many, many years ago, 80s, 90s. I was living in Dallas, doing a lot of different performances. And I was doing quite a few shows, different characters, Mother Goose and so forth, at a local tea room, downtown Plano. And the woman, Jennifer, who owned the tea room, the American Girl series had just erupted, and it was, and her retail section was filled with American Girl everything. And one of them was particularly popular at the time, and her name was Samantha. And it was the young Victorian era girl who was orphaned, but went to live with Grand Mary, her father's grandmother. And there was a whole book series about Samantha. And I suddenly had the idea, why don't we do with Grand Mary, and I'll tell stories about Samantha and teach etiquette and so on and so forth. So I developed Grand Mary. And of course, always sold the books in the retail section, because I read the books and told the actual stories from the books. Time went on, and after I moved to Albuquerque, but not a whole lot, and then I started seeing the possibility of developing more depth in Grand Mary. The American Girl series was still popular, but Samantha was long gone. Nobody knew who Samantha was anymore. So I didn't have to stay true to that format, and to almost speak to Grand Mary, saying, who are you and who do you want to be? I was so interested, and always have been, in the suffragette movement. And I could feel her pushing that history and women's rights, and how women couldn't hold jobs and they couldn't have property. And if there was a divorce, the husband automatically got the children, and the woman was literally banned. The unfairness, the things that happened during those years are almost unfathomable now. And so I began researching and developing her, and thought, I'm going to be a time traveler. And you're going to call me forth, and I won't know where I am when I land. I'm used to time traveling. And I carry my little Victorian trunk so that I can have memorabilia. And I do carry a lot of memorabilia that I pass around, that they can look at and touch and have that kinesthetic learning experience. So I'm hitting all learning styles. I'm hitting the auditory, I'm hitting the visual, and I'm hitting the kinesthetic. Start talking about the suffragettes. Most young girls, and even older girls or women, know nothing about the suffragettes. after them. So it's a chance for me to really explain this is who we are, and this is why we are. And it's just an exciting thing. So it's not a performance like a play. Chautauquans are that way, where it's more of a play form. This is just more of a conversation and more organic and more, what do they seem more interested in? I do teach etiquette as we go along. I tell funny stories as we go. A look. Women come up to me and say, it's amazing how quiet they are, how good they are, because Grandmary just gives them a look and they just sit up straight. It's just amazing. She's very approachable. She's austere. She's not stern. She's very approachable. Kids want to be around her. They want to touch her. They want to hug her. So she's become very full-bodied at this point compared to when she was, back in the 80s and 90s.
So when it comes to incorporating historical elements or historical narrative, what kind of research do you do?
You've got to commit to it. You can get excited about your subject or your person that you're working on, and sometimes we just want to just write something really quick and pretend that's good enough. But you really need to do that research and commit to it so that there is an authenticity, because you really are a teacher when you're on that stage, and there's an integrity factor that I need to teach the truth. Because if I don't teach the truth, and it may not be real, but it's still the truth. Grandmary doesn't exist in history. There's no woman named Grandmary. That was just a common name, by the way, for a grandmother. But everything about her is authentic and real. So it's not just researching your character, it's researching the times, that era, what else was going on. Your particular person, what was their relationship to other people within their families or within their communities. So you've got to find something that you're interested in and that you admire, or are at least drawn to, because maybe it's a villainous character, and that research. I encourage people to use the internet. I mean, it's a fast tool. Wikipedia is not your best friend. It's fast, but it's not accurate. But I also encourage people, go to the libraries and talk to the reference librarians. There are so many books about things that are not even on the internet. The Chautauquans that I have done, both of them, I use books a lot. Reading books about not those characters per se, but that era and what was happening. You've got to devote the time to research.
Some History Day, well, for all History Day projects, talking about the context is very important. So what you're saying is it's important to get a sense of the era to make a performance what facts or events you're using.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Because your character, whoever it is, does not live in a vacuum. And you may say, well, my character is about Susan B. Anthony. But it's not really. It's about Susan B. Anthony and her relationship, all of the other women and that era and that society and that town and her family and so on and so forth. That's what gives it depth. Otherwise, it's just a book reporting. You down some facts, hold a piece of paper, and read it, and it's a book report.
So, for instance, with Grandmary, what are some of the things that you've drawn from your reading about the context of what was going on in New York at that time that you incorporate into your performance?
Things that I bring out, I have pictures that I've copied onto old looking paper so that I can show them things. And I really stress the lack of privilege and rights of children and women. And this is how they lived, and that they, all of the couldn't do's. I really go into that. I show a picture of a young woman, a beautiful young woman from the Victorian era, and I've named her Cora. And she's a fictional character, and she's engaged to my son, Garth, the suffragette. And so I talk about how active she is walking in the parade. She's not afraid to go to jail if she has to. And I talk about the reason that I, because of my age and my station in the New York society, that I have stepped back. I don't want to march. I don't want to go to prison. But I can be highly effective because the mayor, the governor comes to tea. I know all the politicians and have for years. So I have a certain, within that society, without being overt. My position in society will open doors where other people couldn't go in. The other aspect is there's a perception that the suffragettes were poor working women, you know, women of the streets, women in manufacturing companies that were working under horrendous conditions. And that is true, but there was a huge portion of suffragettes, wealthy women because they married wealthy, and they were women of position. They were women like me. So they used that power and position to try to get laws changed. Today is so appropriate for us to talk about grandmother. I just get chills because it is November 8th. It is voting day. And do you know that all day long women are gathering at Susan B. Anthony's grave? And they're taking the I voted stickers and placing it on her grave. And I literally get chills when I think of that, because it's like we're doing it.
Not to mention that some of us are actually voting for a woman in this election, which is a pretty historic
for the first
opportunity.
time. For the very first time. An African American president, a first, that could be followed by a woman, a first.
There's a lot of firsts. And the suffragette, it really is the start of that story. But it's interesting to me that you took a sort of a different spin on that story. Instead of looking at the people who were out marching in the streets, you were looking at people who were pulling strings in the back room. And how did you find any real life examples of women like that who were?
I read books upon books, every book I could find in the library about the suffragettes. Of course, all the obvious ones about the Seneca Falls Convention and Susan B. Anthony and all of the head runners, the names that were known of that time. But also looking at pictures. Pictures are stories. So I could look at the pictures of conditions that the women worked under, the children worked under, the people of color of the time. You know, suffragettes were abolitionists. Suffragettes were absolutely, incredibly responsible for helping to get the vote for African American men, black men at the time, not black women, but black men. Black men could vote before women of color or any woman could vote. And the suffragettes were highly contributory to that. So it's the nuances of things that I found in books. What was happening? Government doing? What were local towns doing? What were the plays and the music about? The books that were popular at the time? Because those are influencers of our society. It takes time. It takes research. But if you love what you're doing, if you love the subject, the person, the whatever, you get lost in it.
Absolutely, and I'm expecting a lot of the National History students are starting to get lost in their topics. I hope so. I hope you all are having fun. So I'm really interested in how you looked at some of these pictures, or and this is a little bit off topic. It's not exactly making a performance, but we do encourage students to look at these primary sources, the photographs or illustrations, political cartoons, and to consider them as primary sources with their topic. When you get when you have all this wonderful context, say about the terrible working conditions or the inequality of treatment of women, how then do you turn around and incorporate it into a narrative? I mean, it sounds like with Grandma Mary, you're not just sitting down and telling a story from beginning to end. You said it's a little bit more of a conversation. So how do you work in that historical element to a performance?
I think with Grand Mary in particular, because it's not a true one-act play, it's a series of stories that I allow to evolve organically in whatever group I'm with. So instead of having one story, I've got 100 stories in my head. And it's letting the pictures tell me the story and imagining, what if I were there? What would that have been like? What if someone I loved was in that picture right now? It's allowing the character to almost come to life and talk to you. It's almost an otherworldly experience in a way of trying to formulate, what is it, what are the stories that I need to know? Who are you? And what happened to you? How did you become who you are? With each of the characters, with each of the pictures, with a town. How did this town become who it is? So it's all a series of stories. What is a story? Beginning, middle, end. So looking at a picture, there's a beginning, middle, end. It's there is a woman at a sewing machine. What is the story? She is so tired. She is at the end of a 16-hour shift. The 6th day with no break, no time off. You can see the sun setting through the tall windows in the back. Her hands ache from the hard work. She is so tired she can hardly keep her eyes open. And yet, if she's to make enough money, because it's piecemeal, she's got to force herself to work at least another 2 hours so that she can stop at the bakery, hoping it'll still be open, and buy bread to take home to her children. So I just looked at the picture and said, tell me the story. And in my mind's eye just now, I see the picture, and on this right here, I just made up the story of that picture. You have great license with History Day because there are many aspects, even if you're doing a real life character, there's many aspects around it that you don't have to necessarily adhere to just quotes that they said. You take in the context of everything that was going on. Look at it from another point of view. What if you were an observer in the town? Say you're doing Billy the Kid. What if you were an observer in the town and you saw Billy the Kid out on the street and a gunfight about to erupt? How would you feel? What would you be thinking? Did you know who he was? What did you heard about him? Were you secretly excited, or were you afraid? I'm going to get shot. So it's questioning yourself about what's happening, and you start developing all of these different stories. I think it's more than one story. I think it's many stories.
Well, I'm fascinated by what you say about letting the characters speak to you and letting the pictures and the sources speak to you. 2 weeks ago, when we did the Ask a Website, I was asking the student how she chose her media. Very close to what she said. And she said she chose media or clips from her interviews where she was so moved by what she saw, where she just felt that emotional connection. And I think it's important for students to know it doesn't have to be a straight up biography. In fact, it shouldn't be. What we're talking about is we're talking about what led this person to take a stand. What was the context? Why did they feel the need to take a stand? Who was opposing them? And so it really is that emotional moment of, why do I need to take this choice? Why do I need to watch my daughter-in-law go to jail? Or why do I need to have the governor over for tea?
Exactly. Exactly. Connection is the key word. Story is connection. Acting is connection. History is connection.
Absolutely. Beautifully put. So as far as a linear story, it sounds like the linearity, the I was born and blah, 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 doesn't count as much as being able to grab that
That's
nugget
right.
of why are we here telling this story?
That's right. Otherwise, we go back to, it's just a book report. My story is on blah, 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 and he was born, blah, 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 blah. And instead, it can be almost a quiet moment of someone sitting looking out a window saying, I can see all of the workers going home from the factory right now. Under this current president and this current king in England. So you're telling about the era, saying, well, I live in this town and this date. You're describing in depth something that's living to, it's just facts.
Well, I think that sounds exciting. So when you're developing material for a character like Grand Mary, who speaks modern English, but still is not going to be talking about, she's not going to Instagram her pictures of the suffragette march. She may not even be making telephone calls. So what do you need to be aware of this story?
Being true to it as much as you can, not necessarily taking on things that may be burdensome to you as a performer or add too much burden to the performance itself, such as archaic language or using accents. I would really shy away from those things. You can get a feel of how a character spoke and still convey who that character was without speaking in old world English. I would censor yourself to not fall into the trap of modern day talk. We've become sloppy in our communication, in my view, personal opinion, and we insert the word like 3 times in one sentence. So, like, I'm Cleopatra, and like, I don't like snakes, and like, one killed me. Probably not gonna fly. So it's discipline. It's practicing, rehearsing to the point that it becomes natural. This is how I speak now, not how I speak outside of now, but now this is how I speak. And taking that pressure off of accents or archaic language. That if you are a seasoned performer, expects that of you. But I don't think as a high school or middle school student, anybody or any judge absolutely expects that of you for History Day. Because if it's not well done, it will detract and can ruin a performance. And I've seen students do it where they start out with one accent and suddenly it just evaporates. and especially when they're transitioning from character to character, and pretty soon you're so confused you don't even know who they are or who's talking or what's happening. So you have to be really careful of those little things. You know, it's keeping that tightness. In the theater we call it tightness. You know, making it succinct and tight.
Can you unpack that a little bit? I mean, I think I know what you mean, but
if my words that I'm saying as an actor ingrained in me, I know this character, I know what's happening, then I can concentrate on being that character more than I'm searching for words, so that there's long pauses or I'm holding a piece of paper and I'm just reading it, or the professionalism, the tightness is the only word that I can think of. It makes it more believable, more understandable.
so it sounds like, and I've just heard you repeat this a couple of times, it sounds like understanding your character and then rehearsing your script are two keys to achieving that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I understand that you can get very nervous in front of an audience. Regionals are very helpful because it gives you a chance to try this out before you go on to state. Hopefully go on to state. The aspect becomes deeper. It develops the character, and if it's a group performance, how you interact with each other more and more. The more you do it, the better you get. And the more you do it and the better you get, the more believable it is to the audience and to the judges. And anyone can forget a line. I've had it happen even now after all these years in theater. So I've learned tricks. If I forget where I am because I allowed my mind to drift off, I'll use a prop. You know, I'll go back and pick up a cup of something. While inside, I'm frantically thinking, where am I, where am I, where am I?
Well, and I should point out that one of the elements of the Chautauqua performances that's a little bit unusual, we're not asking this of History Day students, is that the Chautauquans are expected to answer questions from the audience in character. And so you may get questions that you were not prepared for that you have to answer in character.
You've got to be prepared for anything, absolutely anything. And answer authentically, you know, with a sense of involvement and being nice and funny, and you've got to, because they'll try to break you out of character. They'll ask a question that there's no way that character would know. Mm-hmm. Like, what drew you to be this character? Because I was born who I am. That's a question you may want to ask Susi Wolf in a few moments, because then I take off a wig or a gown or whatever, and you know, I become Susi Wolf, and then I answer questions differently from that. But it's part of knowing that character. And
all the research you do and all the rehearsal you do is part of just being able to inhabit your character.
That's it, exactly.
So that you can convey that authenticity.
That's it, exactly.
Fantastic. You know what? Let's go ahead, since you mentioned the wig, let's go ahead and get a picture of this up. And and I did want to talk a little bit about.
There's Grand Mary.
There's Grand Mary.
There's Grand Mary.
So I did want to talk a little bit about how History Day students can go about planning for and creating their costumes, their set, and their props. So, for instance, with Grandmary, what we see a little bit of the costume, and tell us how that came about.
Well, at her age and her position, I wanted her to have that black costume that she would have felt comfortable in. It was, you know, formal and austere and so forth. I had a Victorian collar made. It's just a regular black shirt, and then I had Victorian cuffs made so it converts it. It's a Victorian black skirt that I bought online, Victorian boots. Had an actual velvet black tea coat made in England that she wears. It's a hot costume, and the wig is hot.
Oh,
so
I thought
doing
you meant
her,
like-
well, that too.
It is uncomfortably warm.
It's a very warm costume, but there's no doubt. Now, is she 100% authentic? Probably not, and there's a difference between an actor and a reenactor. A reenactor, everything, I mean, my glasses would have to be, you know, an 1870 pair of glasses. I create the illusion of this character. She's probably much more in depth than a History Day student needs to be. But what you do as a costume, you need to do well. And it does need to fit that character, and it does need to fit that era. And you can do a whole lot with people that talent I don't have, the way that you can sew things together or draw things on it. But I've seen students that just show up in t-shirt and jeans, a vest or something. Well, but that t-shirt and jean totally detracts. I don't believe you're Doc Holliday because you're wearing sneakers and jeans and a t-shirt. So if you're going to do costume, you need to do costume. And simple is better, I think. It does not have to be elaborate or expensive at all. This is a time that you can get really, really creative. And, you know, shawls are great for women. Vests are great for boys. Secondhand stores are an excellent resource. You can get a 1940s, 1950s vest, but it will pass for an 1800s vest. It doesn't have to be authentic to the point that, oh, well, those pockets were never there in the 1800s. It looks old enough.
So how do you get ideas for costumes? If
Pictures.
Pictures. All right.
Absolutely. Pictures. Also, you can look in the theater section in the library or go online and look at costumes, Victorian era costumes, those kinds of things. But pictures really help me the most to get a sense of this is how I want Grandmary to look.
Now, so when you do Grandmary, do you have a whole set that you use?
I arrive on my black cane carrying my little Victorian trunk filled with Victorian memorabilia. And presumably I'm going to time travel and we will be at some kind of a tea party, because I do talk about etiquette and manners as we go along, and I should be, you know, at the head of the table or at a table by myself, and then I can open my case and let them start handling things. I think a set enhances the performance, is better, and I've seen some students that it's obvious they spent an enormous amount of time and probably huge amounts of money on sets and costumes. And from a visual standpoint, it's amazing. But the context of the performance was not there because they spent so much time, because they probably enjoyed doing it and found it fun, making the sets and doing the costumes, and the actual performance almost became an afterthought. And you cannot depend upon sets and costumes to wow the judges enough that, oh well, we'll get through on that.
Especially because we instruct the judges not to get wowed by the dazzle. Huh?
That's right. That's right. Bling is not the order of the day, you know, and it should not detract from it. The costumes and the sets should enhance a solid performance, but it shouldn't be like to cover it up, like covering up a flaw.
Now, when you have your Victorian trunk of treasures, how do you use those props, and can you give us some examples of what you might pull out of a trunk to tell a story about women's suffrage?
Well, I've got a picture of a young Victorian woman, and I've named her Cora, and this is my son's fiance. And so I walk around and hold her picture so that they can see how she's dressed. She's very stylish, light colored clothes. Her hair is very bouffant, very different from me. And so I talk a little about the difference of how a young woman would dress and how I would dress. The suffragette sash that I wear, I had it made. It's authentic. It's silk, and it's purple, green, and white, and it says "Votes for Women" on it. So I talk about what those colors mean and how the women would wear. And then
What do they mean?
It's purity, respect, and hope.
Okay.
And we march around. We have a suffragette parade, and we march around and take turns wearing the sash. Pretend that we're walking the streets of New York and we're shouting, "Votes for women. Women can do anything. Women's rights. We need our rights." And it's really an amazing experience. And that little sash, they just feel empowered when they put it on.
So even very simple props, and the students don't have to have their made, but very simple props.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'll talk with them about how do you get to school, and they describe school buses and so forth to me. And then I've got a picture of a school bus from the Victorian era. It's a horse-drawn, enclosed buggy, very uncomfortable, squeezed in, hot, you know, tight quarters. And so then I talk about, well, this is how Samantha goes to school. Mm-hmm. And I show that. So they've got a visual now of, wow, it's pretty cool that I get to go in a bus and not have to ride something like that.
That also helps bring your audience into the context of that historical period.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So what? Let's say you were. Let's say you have a group of students. We'll talk about group performance. So we have a group of students, and they're working up a performance, and they want to know how to pull together their props and costumes. How can they do that without spending $1 million?
Well, I think the first thing, you've got to have the context of the performance first. Who am I? Who am I to these other people here? What are we doing? Why are we here? The costumes and the stage settings needs to come out of that decision making, rather than let's get a bunch of costumes and sets built and put together, and then we'll figure out what we do with it. It's kind of like the cart before the horse. Secondhand stores are an extremely wonderful resource for costumes. Some people really enjoy. It's not a skill I've got, but there can be moms or even girls or boys that are in the performance that want to help and maybe want to sew some things. Poster board is perfect for sets. PVC pipe is perfect for sets. Simple, simple, easy to carry. Because remember, you've got to carry this stuff yourself. You've got to set it up.
In 5 minutes.
And that's right. That's right. So you don't want something elaborate and complicated and heavy and something They can fall. I've seen a lot of sets that just fell apart because they just weren't put together that well. So whatever you do, it needs to be sturdy enough that it will stand there. You know, leaning things against chairs, probably not a good idea.
So, you know, I have a question just because I always judge websites. I never judge performances. In performances, are there different ways, different methods that students use to show the date or to show time changing? Or, you know, if they're telling a story that, you know, let's say they're talking about Frederick Douglass, and it starts out with Frederick Douglass as a younger man and then follows him through, you know, abolition and through his work with the suffragette movement or with the women's suffrage movement. How would you, or what are good examples of ways that students have showed time passing that way?
I've seen some good transitions where students would disappear behind a set, and then they might reappear. And so that you know it's the same person. I'll just use the vest as an example. Maybe he always wore the same vest. So you've got someone that's maybe in knickers and the vest as a young boy and disappears behind the curtain, and then, or a set, and then suddenly the other end reappears, much older, wearing pants, but wearing that same vest, so that your mind makes the connection, oh, it's still Frederick Douglass, without having to explain the obvious. Reappearing and looking out at the audience and saying, hello, I'm Frederick Douglass and I'm older now. That dilutes the power of the performance. The less you tell us, the better. Show us.
That's great. That is a great tip. So I know we've been talking a little bit about what makes strong performances, but I did want to talk a little bit about your experience as a judge. How many years have you judged for History Day?
Oh my gosh, I don't
So
even, many years, yeah.
Well, that's how we all fall in love with it. So, what to you? And we've talked some around this, but for you, what makes a strong NHD performance? What makes it really pop out? And I know that with the scoring, we put a lot of emphasis on being able to describe the topic's impact in history and tying it to the theme. And it's only 20% of the scores actually judging it as a performance.
Mm-hmm.
But that 20%, it still counts. So what makes for a really tight, good NHD performance in 10 minutes? What can those kids do?
First and foremost, and this I bet I have written this on almost every blue sheet that there is. Talk slower, talk louder, clearly. It's become part of our society that we talk like we text. We talk really, really fast, and sometimes because of nerves, they think they're talking loud, but they're really not. Nor are they clear. Even when you can hear them, they're not enunciating. So part of the preparation has to be somebody maybe working with them to do vocal exercises, mouth exercises. I do this before I go on stage to loosen the mouth up and learn about enunciation. Instead of saying our words without barely moving our lips, to talk and really move our lips, speaking from the diaphragm. It's not just screaming, which is hard on the vocal cords. It's actually speaking from the diaphragm. And these are all very advanced techniques. I understand that.
Right.
But even for History Day, they can practice that. Speak louder, speak clearer, and speak slower. The mind can only follow so much. Do we have a question?
No, I'm just checking for questions because I'm things coming So is there a good method you would recommend for the students to practice in front of other people?
Practice in front of the mirror, and absolutely practice in front of other people that may not be their peers, because their peers are not going to be looking for the same things that an adult audience member or an adult judge is looking for, because their peers are used to listening to them within the context of speaking fast and not clearly. So they're going to say, yeah, I got it. It's fine. So they need to get those teachers involved, parents involved, grandparents, those kinds of people, and say, can you really understand me?
And maybe not, maybe have them sit back a little bit farther.
Yes, absolutely.
And then speaking of evolution, I know that you see a lot of students between regionals and state. Maybe you'll be judging senior performances at regionals and junior performances at state. So you don't necessarily get to see how the students evolve their projects.
Exactly.
But what would you recommend to students as far as getting, making those improvements, evolving your characters, making that leap up to a higher level between regional and state?
Whether it's single performance or group performance, allow that regional performance to really be a learning ground for you. Don't take it personally, and I know that's easier said than done, but the judges are not saying things to deliberately try to upset you or discredit your work. We're trying to help you because we're rooting for you. We want you to go on and be magnificent in state. So really take to heart the things that the judges have told you. If you've got a drama teacher that you work with at school, really pay attention. After the regionals, now is the time to get very honest with yourself about, you know, it's just not getting the message across. Or, wow, I was 4 minutes over. It was 14 minutes. What can I cut that won't detract from the performance itself? So practicing, sometimes you've got to almost start a rewrite again of how you want this performance to be. And I cannot stress that enough. Rehearse, 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 and know those lines.
With judging the performances, what I've heard from judges for years is that the performance category is one of the hardest to judge because you have 10 minutes period to watch a performance, warts and all. And it's not like websites or papers where you get to go back and review and look at one and then go back and look at another one and think about it some more. So you have one chance. What can students do to make, I guess, a couple of things. One, to make it easier to judge, but two, to really get across that historical impact, because that's the 60% of their score. So, you know, should they take a Shakespearean approach and summarize, do the play, summarize, or what works for you as a judge, or what is it? The speaking clearly?
You know, it almost varies with each piece. It's hard to give it a blanket, do this, because it really varies with what character are they doing or what event are they doing. Everything that they write, single or group, they, after every scene or every speech or every whatever, ask themselves, is this being true to the theme, and is it helping to convey it? Without actually coming out and using the actual words of the theme. You don't have to be that obvious about it. But is this really staying true to that theme? Summaries are very good because it kind of moment.
If a student is doing something like a summary, you know, so they come out as a narrator and they say, here's the story of this character who took a stand in this way, blah, blah, blah. How, and let's go back to the individual performance, because I know this is the most underrepresented category across New Mexico. People are afraid of individual performances, apparently. And it is the easiest path to nationals. So how can a student or any performer switch from being a narrator into a character, or switch from one character? We talked about showing time passing, but what can performers do to make it clear to the judges that they're switching tracks?
Well, if I'm going to do a summary in character, what I might do as Grand Mary is almost come and sit in front of them, so there's more of an intimacy, and say, so, as a time traveler, my time is now up. I've come today so that you know what the women in my era did for the women in your era. It's the suffragette movement that we have such hopes for in the future. You can sum it up in that kind of a way. You can become a narrator, but you have to make a division or a break from that character. So you need to take off the vest, or take off the wig, or take off, where visually there's a separation. Move somewhere else on that stage and say, you know, she lived another 40 years after that event, but she never gave up. She wrote 3 more books. And sum it up that way, so that it's obvious, okay, it's a narrator talking now, staying within the context of the theme, and telling it, you know, how it all ended.
So it might be switching props, it might be
Absolutely.
a change in voice.
Absolutely.
Or it might just be a change in position.
And positioning. I mean, literally moving out of the space that you've used, move to another space, usually closer to the audience. So that, and there's absolutely no doubt that you're no longer that character, and now you are a narrator.
Well, you know what? I would actually, now you have me wanting to talk about blocking, but we are just about out of time here. So I'm going to come around. I'm going to come around this side, and we'll say goodbye to Grand Mary, and thank you for all you did for us. And this is Susie and Ellen. The next webcast is going to be in 2 weeks. We're going to be doing Ask a Documentary Expert. And we have Ashley Page, who is our Southern Regional Coordinator, and who brought documentaries to nationals on a number of occasions when she was an NHD student. So please catch up with us in 2 weeks. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me, and I'll communicate the questions to Susie.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, Susie,
thank you
so much.
It's
I've learned
truly an honor.
I learned so much from you, and it totally makes me want to do historic performance now, because I want to go thrift shopping for a costume. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.